And now, a passage from Harbingers of Change, American Merchants and the Formosa Annexation Scheme by Thomas R. Cox. Peter Parker, the Commissioner of the United States to China, proposed in 1857 that his country establish control over the island known to Westerners as Formosa. In recounting the story of Parker's proposal, Tyler Dennett, the pioneer historian of American involvement in East Asia, emphasized the nationalistic arguments that Parker and his allies marshaled in support of the idea. During the decades since, other American historians have explicitly or implicitly supported Dennett's assessment. Foster Reed Dulles put it succinctly when he wrote that Parker was an imperialist of the same school as William Seward and Commodore Matthew C. Perry. Such an interpretation makes Parker's proposal seem an almost perfect illustration of the self-confident American nationalism of the 1840s and 1850s, the spirit that gave rise to the idea of manifest destiny. Dennett, however, based his interpretation almost exclusively on materials in Parker's official correspondence, materials designed to win support for the proposition rather than present an accurate account. When one examines the genesis of the proposal, a different picture emerges. Ethnocentric conceptions of duty and destiny may have been a causative factor, but the search for wealth through trade, and subsequently the protection of vested interests on the island, were more directly responsible for the scheme. American traders had been seeking commercial fortune on Taiwan since early 1855. And by the end of the following year, one of them, William M. Robinett, had gained a near monopoly over the island's foreign trade. His success attracted powerful British mercantile houses. In an attempt to forestall these commercial rivals, Robinett and his ally, Gideon Nye Jr., approached Parker with a proposal for American control over the island and soon gained his support. Considered in the light of the men and motives behind it, the proposal that Parker forwarded to Secretary of State William M. Marcy seems more an indicator of changes then underway in East Asia than an illustration of the mood of nationalism come expansionism that existed at home. A new sort of leadership was emerging in the American community on the China coast. The scheme for American control over Taiwan both announced its presence and tested its strength. Several developments lay behind American interest in Taiwan in the mid-19th century. For 150 years after it passed under the control of the Manchus in the late 17th century, few Westerners visited the island. During most of the period, its ports were officially closed to foreign commerce. Then, near the middle of the 19th century, Occidentals began to pay increasing attention to the island. Treaties between China and the Western powers signed during 1842 to 1844 opened opportunities for expanded trade with China. Shortly after, California's gold rush attracted large numbers of merchant vessels to Pacific waters. Trade between California and China soon developed. En route, vessels passed near and often within sight of Taiwan. Rising Western maritime activity in the vicinity resulted in an increase in the number of vessels lost on the island's shores. Both sightings and shipwrecks served to remind traders of the island's presence. Furthermore, continuing difficulties between the Western powers and China, as well as Chinese pirates, occasioned the stationing of steam-powered naval vessels in East Asian waters. Coastal steamers were also putting in their appearance, and some Americans were talking of establishing a trans-Pacific steamship line. These developments drew attention to Taiwan. Steamships needed coal more than rumor substantiated its presence on the island. In 1847, a British naval officer visited mines on Taiwan and reported favorably on their potential. The following year, Chinese junks carried some 300 tons to Hong Kong. By 1850, regular shipments were arriving at Amoy, and Westerners were drawing upon the supply. Yet Taiwan remained largely unknown. A few Westerners acquainted themselves with earlier studies of the island, and some made visits to it, but even the best informed had a picture that was far from complete. Under the circumstances, no one made a concerted effort to open the island to foreign trade, though opium traders did call there from time to time. There seems to have been a widespread belief that Taiwan could soon be open to regular commerce, but official representatives of the powers apparently assumed that could only be done by dealing directly with Peking, while commercial interests still knew too little of the island's potential to risk their vessels in the hope that officials on Taiwan might allow them to trade. The islanders' reputation as bloodthirsty pirates may have helped dissuade merchants from undertaking such ventures. By 1854, the situation was changing. As the Taiping Rebellion spread in southern China during the early 50s, the flow of rice from the interior to China's coastal cities slowed. To meet the demand, increased quantities of rice had to be obtained from Southeast Asia and Taiwan. Once again, Occidental traders were reminded of the island's untapped sources of profit. Moreover, as the Civil War raged in the hinterlands, it threatened to disrupt normal trading operations in the treaty ports. Many Westerners must have been considering alternate places to trade should the rebellion halt commercial activity at established centers. Townsend Harris, an American businessman engaged in Far Eastern trade and later consul general for the United States and Japan, noted the rising interest in Taiwan. After a careful study of available information, he concluded that the island had great potential for commerce. In 1854, he foreshadowed later American interest in acquiring Taiwan when he suggested to Secretary of State Marcy that the United States purchase it from China. For all this rising interest, no one took steps to establish regular commercial contacts until 1855. Then, without fanfare, Nathaniel Crosby Jr. reopened the island to trade. He was an unlikely candidate for the honor, an obscure American sea captain seeking to recoup his fortunes after suffering setbacks in other quarters of the globe. He had neither money, prestige, nor power to aid him in his venture. Twice during the early 50s, Crosby had been to China to trade, but his knowledge of East Asia was meager. In the fall of 1854, Crosby was preparing to depart from the Pacific Northwest on a third commercial venture to Asia. As he explained to Joseph Lane, Oregon's delegate to Congress, "I am now in command of the bark Louisiana and are loading with lumber and shall sail in some 10 days for Hong Kong, China. I have determined to try and find a market for a portion of our lumber, as the present prices in California will not warrant shipping to that market, and probably they will nearly or quite supply themselves in the future. My intention is to visit on this voyage all the ports open in China and introduce our Oregon lumber and any other of our Oregon produce that they will require also. I intend calling at one of the ports open in Japan on my return. I hope to be successful in opening a trade with those two countries that will prove beneficial to Oregon and Washington territories." In other words, as Crosby put it 3 weeks later, he hoped to ferret out something in China and Japan that will add to the commercial advantages of Oregon, as our trade with San Francisco is about done. On August 13th, Crosby sailed from the Columbia. 2.5 months later, he dropped anchor off Hong Kong. The same issue of the China Mail that announced his arrival carried an article by S. Wells Williams, who had served as an interpreter for Commodore Perry on his mission to Japan. Williams gave a detailed description of the port of Shimoda, one of 3 ports described as opened to trade by Perry. This and Williams's article describing Hakodate, which appeared in an earlier issue of the paper, made clear the very limited markets for lumber and other products of the Pacific Northwest and Japan. All the hills, Williams wrote, are covered with a thick growth of trees. Since Japan appeared unpromising, Crosby abandoned plans for a visit to the island kingdom, but he continued his quest for markets in China. In February, he sailed to Amoy with a cargo of cotton goods. There, he picked up an interpreter who spoke the dialect of Taiwan, and on March 13, 1855, set sail for the island. The report of the American consul at Amoy indicated that the Louisiana sailed in ballast, but Crosby later admitted that it carried opium to Taiwan. On reaching the island, Crosby anchored off the port of Taiwan Fu, modern Tainan, where the Dutch had carried on the bulk of their trade 2 centuries earlier. Officials there refused Crosby permission to enter. Instead, they suggested Crosby sail down the coast to the more isolated port of Takao, modern Kaohsiung. At Takao, Crosby found a large protected anchorage and was met by a local magistrate anxious to encourage trade. Crosby requested a meeting with the intendant over the island, the Tao Tai at Taiwan Fu, in order to make some arrangements with him for trading in the future. The local magistrate quickly arranged for Crosby to meet the Tao Tai at an isolated site a 2-day journey away. When Crosby and the Tao Tai met, the latter explained his earlier refusal to let the captain trade at Taiwan Fu. If he had allowed Crosby to enter, The official stated it would surely have been reported to his superiors in Amoy, and he would have been punished. For the same reason, he dared not let Crosby trade there in the future, but the captain could trade at Takao. The mandarin there could then report to Taiwan Fu, and all would be satisfactory. Crosby requested permission to trade at Keelung, near the coal mines of northern Taiwan. The Taotai granted the request, but refused to put his permission in writing, for fear the captain would show the document to others, and the mandarin might be brought into trouble. Crosby returned to his vessel, not only having gained permission to trade, but also greatly impressed with what he had seen. As far as the eye could take in, he reported hundreds upon hundreds of acres of rice and sugar were stretched out. The people appeared to have devoted their attention almost exclusively to agriculture and appeared to be happy and comfortable. Cattle, too, were seen in great abundance. At Takao, Crosby made arrangements to purchase sugar and rice. Prices were low, and Crosby left the island with a cargo that proved a lucrative speculation. Moreover, he departed with every intention of returning. He had found markets for Oregon's products in Hong Kong and vicinity, and a source of return cargoes of rice and sugar. As Crosby told the editor of the Portland Oregonian, "I doubt not that I may be able to open a profitable and direct trade between Formosa and Oregon." Crosby hurried back to the United States to arrange for the transfer of his business operations and family to Hong Kong, from which he planned to direct his future trading activities. While he was in the United States, others were also active. Shippers in the far west emulated Crosby by sending cargoes of lumber from the Pacific Northwest to China. More important, Crosby's voyage stirred residents of Hong Kong to action. True, other captains visited Taiwan at about the same time as did Crosby, but it was his visit, not those of his contemporaries, that demonstrated that it was both possible and profitable to trade there for items other than coal. When this became known, traders along the South China coast quickly moved to take advantage of the information. Crosby's voyage was clearly the catalyst for the development. The news of Crosby's success spread at a rate astonishing even by the standards of the tightly knit commercial community of Hong Kong. Gideon Nye's bark Isabelita Hine cleared for Taiwan even before Crosby had filed entry papers with the harbor master at Victoria. Shortly after, William Robinette dispatched the bark Santiago, which soon returned with a profitable cargo. As news of these successful ventures spread, others began to prepare to dispatch vessels and even to establish permanent trading stations on the island. Foremost in this group were two American firms, Nye Brothers and Company and Williams, Anton and Company. To avoid competition with these firms, as well as to strengthen his position against other potential rivals, Robinette proposed that the three join forces to tap the resources of Taiwan. The two firms accepted his proposal. They jointly dispatched 5 vessels to the island, including the bark Science, which was manned and equipped to remain in Taiwanese waters as a store ship. Aboard the vessels were $80,000 and various presents for use in currying favor with officials.